Hi, everyone, and welcome back to the Leading in a Crisis podcast. On this podcast, we talk all things crisis management with an emphasis on storytelling from leaders from the front lines of crisis management. I'm Tom Mueller. Thanks for joining us again today. So happy to have you along with us. Hey, if you want to email the show, you can drop me a line at tom@leadinginacrisis.com. Love to hear from you. Love to hear your comments on the show or any suggestions you might have for future guests. So thanks again for being with us. On the show today, we have a very interesting guest, someone I've known for probably 30 years or so, but who has a very storied career in media and public affairs. And my guest today is Ruth Rendon. Now, Ruth has worked her share of crisis incidents during her career, including the Deepwater Horizon oil spill. She no doubt has some interesting stories to share with us. Ruth, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Tom. Pleasure to be here.
Hey, if you don't mind, just take a moment and give us a quick thumbnail review of your sort of career trajectory from being a crack news reporter all the way up to corporate communications.
Sure. So I started with attending the University of Texas and received a journalism degree. And straight from college, I was with the Associated Press, covering state legislature in Austin, and then moved to Houston. And I've been in Houston ever since. And then after a short time there, I moved to the Houston Chronicle, covering all things sports, business, you name it. And then made the jump in 2008, left the newspaper industry and joined BP in Texas City, and had a lot of interaction with our North American group in Houston. And then following Deepwater, BP sold the refinery in Texas City. So I then went on to work with Marathon Petroleum, who bought the refinery. And most recently, I was with SABIC, a diversified chemical company based in Saudi Arabia. But I worked in Houston for that as well.
Okay, so you've covered a lot of territory and moved between companies. It's sort of fascinating when you get sold with an asset that is being divested
Yeah.
by a company, and you're kind of like, wait a minute,
Wait a
what?
minute.
And
Yeah,
but it ends up being the start of a new adventure.
absolutely.
You
Yeah.
never know how these things are going to go. Um, and I'm sort of fascinated, Ruth. One of the things um, that I'm fascinated. Well, let me start with this. Your skills as a reporter. I also started as a reporter working at the Galveston Daily News down in South Texas.
Yep.
And I think you and I first met, it could have been at incidents where there was common coverage, or it might even have been when I was working down at Texas City at the big refinery, and you were covering incidents for the Houston
Yes.
Chronicle. We'll talk about working in a refinery environment a little bit. But hey, talk to me about the skills of a newspaper reporter. And, does that help you when you move into a corporate communications role, and how so?
Oh, absolutely. I think when you're a reporter, you're kind of a one-man show, right? I mean, you're a general reporter. Everybody wants to say they're an investigative reporter. Well, you investigate every day. You just don't have the timeline to spend months on a project. It's a 5 p.m. deadline or whatever your deadline is every day. So it really makes you very resourceful. Um, it makes you an ace at networking and finding that subject matter expert that you need, that you can talk to, and that they trust you to share the information that you need. And so with that, you kind of delve into everything, right? From local school board meetings to city council meetings, the county government, state agencies, NASA. I mean, it's everything. So you're really a jack of all trades, and know who to go to. So when you jump and so part of my job at the Chronicle was covering part of Galveston County that included Texas City. So when I joined BP, basically supporting the refinery in Texas City, for me, it was an easy transition because I already knew all the key stakeholders. They knew me. And it went from having to sell myself to someone as being a reporter to trust me. I then was the representative for the company because I was hired as a community relations director. And it was in the aftermath of a horrible explosion that I covered for the Chronicle. And then 3 years later, I joined BP. So it was, I had to, same kind of skill set of trust, the just
Networking.
networking, all of that played a big role.
Yeah, you're
And
more on
then
the Chamber of Commerce side at this point rather than
absolutely,
reporter.
absolutely, yeah. So all that just fell into place, and so for me, it was very easy. A lot of changes in that it wasn't as fast paced for me of a daily deadline, and not like, oh yeah, I need to write something for intranet space, but
Right.
it wasn't like I needed by 3. It was get it to me when you can.
I had I did a similar thing, right? I jumped from being a newspaper reporter covering industry to going to work for industry. And I found that some of the local mayors in the local communities were a little suspicious of me when I started showing up at different meetings in a corporate communications role rather than being a
Yeah.
sort of investigative newspaper guy. And it took a while for them to sort of get over that. And then they sort of took glee in sending reporters to me to ask about difficult questions and
Questions.
stuff. So they got
Yeah.
their revenge there.
Yeah.
Okay, well that's good. How did you like working in a refinery setting? And I ask you this because when I talk to younger people in energy companies about career path, I always say you should get out to the field and learn the business from the ground up and do some networking there, but get out. And boy, I find there's a real hesitancy to doing that with some of the
Yeah.
younger staff today. What's your
Yeah.
experience?
I would agree with you. You're young, you want to go to the clubs on the weekend and meet up with your friends and stuff. And you get out to these smaller communities or in the suburbs, and there's not that much for young people to do. Um, but on the flip side, the job career wise, it's awesome. I mean, I totally agree with you. I would totally recommend for somebody to do that. You go into a refinery, it forces you to learn the business, right? You, as the media rep, community rep, whatever, you can't explain to those stakeholders what's going on unless you know what's going on. And the only way to do that is how does it work? What happens when the crude comes into the refinery? What different processes occurs? What are the different units? What do they do? All of that. It's so important. And I found it fascinating. And I had to laugh at myself. Just a little side note, Tom. I had to laugh at myself because when I was a reporter and there was some kind of incident at any plant, whether it was BP, Deer Park, the Shell in Deer Park, I would always ask, is the plant shut down? And
Mhm.
then when I joined the corporate ranks, I was like, that is the stupidest question you could ask because it's not like you just flip a switch, right?
Right,
Maybe that unit is down, but everything else is running, right? And so
right.
I always laugh at myself for that.
These are very complex operating facilities, and until you sort of get in there and work at one, you have no idea.
None.
And gosh, and there's so much, when you think about crisis management, crisis response, boy, when you've got, high temperature hydrocarbons moving through pipelines, moving through processing units, there's always the potential for something to
Mm-hmm.
happen, for a small leak to occur, which becomes a fire, which becomes thick clouds of black smoke roiling into the sky. and helicopters overhead,
Yep.
newspaper reporters bugging you. Any particular stories that come to mind from that, from your time working in the refining area?
Well, I will say this, again, coming from the newspaper world, early on, like I'm talking maybe a month or two of being at BP, my boss and one of my colleagues were out of town, and I was it when it came to corporate affairs. And sure enough, we had a little hiccup. It wasn't much, but it was still a hiccup. So had to be proactive and write that holding statement in case we had any media calls. And it involved a tank, and so, again, being the reporter, you're inquisitive, and so it's good to ask those questions of those subject matter experts once you get there, right? How does it work? What does it do? Whatever. So I asked this gentleman, so was there a crude in the tank? And he said, no, we just de-inventoried it. And I'm like, what? De-inventoried? Yeah, we had just, drained it. It was empty. Okay, well then let's say it's empty, so you really have to watch for those, lingo
The
that's
jargon.
normal within the fence line, but not anywhere outside, and all the acronyms and all the nicknames. And, heck, I found that even with people, you know,
Hmm.
we know, oh, you need to ask Pine Knot. Who? That was just somebody's nickname, but he was well known. So you go like, who is he? And then trying to find him in the directory. Well, he's not listed as Pine Knot. So, just things like that. That was, I was found amusing, but it shows the camaraderie, that everybody knows each other, they depend on each other. So that was
Hmm.
a really cool thing. But back to your original question, I would highly recommend, go out there. Those same people that you meet and learn from at the refineries, they don't stay there. A lot of them don't stay there their whole career. So even if you were there for a few years and then moved to the corporate office, those same people are now going to be climbing the ranks elsewhere. And you always have, again, that networking going throughout your career. And they end up being good friends, people that you can depend on. Hey, this is going on. Who can I call? And they're a good resource for you.
Yeah, I remember that, the guys, well, the men and women who were sort of young engineers cutting their teeth in the refinery settings there, 20 years later, they're vice presidents, right? Or general
Uh-huh.
managers. And when something comes up and you suddenly need to talk to the VP of this area, it's like, oh yeah, I remember you from Texas City or from that
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
field job. It's those kind of things stay with you and
Uh-huh.
really valuable for you.
Yep.
You
Yep.
you brought up an interesting issue just around jargon, where your field engineer there talked about de-inventorying the tank. And of course, that's something that communications people around the world sort of have to deal with in their particular industries, right? As we all have this language that we use inside the company or inside the agency, which folks outside really may not understand. And so your communications people have to be translators to
Yes.
make sure that we can explain in real human terms what's happening out there. And that can be such a challenge, but I think working in a technical facility like that really, it gives you the opportunity to practice that because
Mm-hmm.
you have
Yeah.
to.
And Tom, adding to that, you kind of have to do that too when you do internal messaging, because those folks that work in the offices and don't get out into the field, they don't know either, right? And so I always made it a point, like whatever that acronym was, spell it out, do that AP style, spell it out first, a pass, and then second reference, just do the acronym. But and it was difficult many times to even find out what that acronym stood for.
Hmm.
So yeah.
Well, now you went from BP after a time and joined SABIC, which is a Saudi chemical company. How was your transition? And actually, in fact, you transitioned from BP to Marathon, then Marathon. I'm sorry. From
Yeah,
yeah, that's right. BP to
BP to
Marathon.
Marathon, and then ended up at SABIC.
So talk to us a little bit about transitions between those. And did you find, particularly like just within the energy field, going from BP to Marathon, was that an easy cultural transition, or did you find it very different between the two companies?
Um, you know, I guess the easy part was that refinery is a refinery, right? You operate it basically the same way. It starts here, it goes through this process, that process, and it ends up being, the end product. But it was a very different setting in that I worked for BP, which was a global energy company from, downstream, upstream, solar, wind, you name it, to Marathon and based in London to Marathon Petroleum, that was a totally downstream business, US based in Findlay, Ohio. So it was very different, right? The travel, as far as going to London and all these, exotic places to Findlay, Ohio, to Garyville, Louisiana, they're just more homegrown type thing, right? Been in existence forever, and it's a really good company, but it was very, very different in how they managed that, even how they managed their incidents, right? Whereas BP had a team, they had what they called the IMT, the incident management team, which was a group of people that if something happened, you got a page or you got called, and you know we did the job, whatever that incident was. And that allowed the leadership team, the plant manager and the other leaders, to continue operating the plant. Marathon was different in that if there was a hiccup, the leadership team at the plant were your leaders on the incident management team. So it's just a little different. And then the corporate wise, and again, BP, if there was an incident, that local team handled it. And in Marathon, if it was something local that the local team, was going to be long term, then they would bring in their corporate team from that was established in Findlay, Ohio. Of course, that would take a while for them to get here. Findlay is 2 hours south of Detroit and, 2 hours from Columbus, Ohio. So, transport is a little different unless you took the corporate jet. So there's a lot of different things. But in the end, again, the refinery is a refinery. You're going to have the same byproduct throughout. And then moving to SABIC, so that was, again, more manufacturing in very small towns across the U.S. It was Saudi based. So it was when I joined, I have to admit, I was a little hesitant just because of all the, media reports about women in KSA, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and all that stuff. But my tenure there was awesome. I have never had as many opportunities there. I had more opportunities there than anywhere else in my career. The folks, my colleagues in Saudi Arabia were wonderful, very respectful, friendly, engaging. I just couldn't say enough good things about that. And incidents were a little different in that luckily that we didn't have that many that were, needed to be elevated. So that was good. Yeah.
Yeah, that's always helpful, right?
Yes.
When you keep the product in the
It's right.
pipelines, that we don't have
Exactly.
to deal with an angry public or
Uh-huh.
lawsuits or all of the other things that go with that. Well, that's a fascinating career history, and I'm so happy to hear that when you're working with SABIC, you had lots of opportunities. I was with you there once or twice doing some training and was always
Yes.
impressed with the caliber of people that we worked with there. So it was
Yeah.
just terrific. Okay. Boy, I wanted to talk a little bit about your tenure with BP. And we both worked that oil spill called the Deepwater Horizon
Yeah.
back in 2010. And, so many lessons learned and stories that came out of that incident. And I just wanted to kind of, tap your brain a little bit because as I think back on this, when when I deployed into the spill was like on well, it was day one, but day three I got on a jet and flew to New Orleans and basically worked there for the next 5 months. But working up in the headquarters, the command post there in north of New Orleans, where the cabinet secretaries from the Obama administration were gathered, where the Coast Guard's lead response, where the BP senior executives were based, who were working the response. And I spent most of my time there working at that level, but you moved around quite a bit out in field locations there and had a kind of a different experience. So tell us a little bit about kind of where you deployed initially and kind of how that progressed for you.
Sure. So I vividly remember a picture on the front page of the Houston Chronicle about the rig and went, it's Transocean, not us. And then 2 days later, I'm in New Orleans. And I think it's because we had so much training in incident management and crisis situations at the refinery that not just myself, but many of my colleagues at the refinery were called up to head to New Orleans or to Louisiana right off the bat. So my first gig was at the Coast Guard station in New Orleans. I got there the day the rig sank. I just vividly remember being there, and it was me and one other person from BP that had the night shift. So we were there, overnight, and already, we knew this was going to be massive, right? Just trying to wrap our head around that. So once there, I was only there about a day or two, and then we drove to Houma, Louisiana, which is where BP has its training center for all the offshore folks.
And it's a big emergency response center to deal with offshore oil spills, right? They're set up in Houma to do that. And you dropped into that. What did you see when you landed there?
A lot of moving pieces. And everybody was just like, it was really, truly a sight to see, because you had experienced people just hitting the ground running, like boom, 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 boom. You're going to do that. You're going to do that, And so I found it fascinating that they could set up that quickly. And I was there a few days, which allowed me to kind of meet all the players, because being in that PIO role at the time, again, it's important to know what's going on. So I would visit all the different teams to know what's going on.
The sections within the incident management team, right? The operations section, logistics section, everybody, if you're not familiar with the incident management system or the incident command system, do a little research on that, because it is a well-oiled machine when you really implement it to do a major response like this.
Yeah, and it works. Yeah. And so I was able to gather a lot of information there. Then I came home after being there maybe a week or so, and got home mid-morning, and I think at 2:00 in the afternoon, got another call from somebody saying, "Can you come to Houma?" I'm like, "I just left." So from the BP side, I think we were trying to figure out where is everyone, where can we deploy them, mapping out where the different centers were going to be throughout the Gulf Coast. And so I went back the next day, got to sleep in my bed one night, went back the next day, did some additional training, and then drove to Mobile, Alabama on a Thursday. And my former boss, Neil Gary, who has passed away, sadly, but he and I were there. And so we helped set up the incident command at the Mobile Convention Center. And then, again, hit the ground running. There was no procrastinating involved. And then that was on a Thursday. Friday afternoon, vividly remember driving to Baldwin County, like the Orange Beach area, beautiful part of Alabama, and meeting with 200, it seemed like 200 people were there, elected officials, key stakeholders in the community, things of that sort. I gave them the update as best I could of what was going on. And then they just peppered me with questions. And I didn't know three-quarters of answers, didn't have them. So
Well,
what I did,
things were developing
yes,
rapidly here,
yes.
right? We had oil spilling into the Gulf from a blown out well. And the fact that you went from Homa to Mobile just showed the response was growing
Growing.
over time, right? We were opening new command posts out along the coast. And you were sort of the tip of the spear then getting into Mobile and getting that started
Hmm.
up. But the information flow, wasn't,
Yeah,
quite a well-oiled machine yet.
right. And at that point, we didn't have WhatsApp, we didn't have Teams, things of that sort. So I gathered the names, everybody that was there and their contact information. And the next day, we started twice a day phone updates, set up an 800 number. And so they would call in and we'd give an update, and then they would bombard us with questions. Again, if we knew the answers, great. If we didn't, met again at 5 o'clock that afternoon, same process, update, ask questions. And this went on for like maybe 4 days where we gave an update and they asked questions. After about 4 days, there were no questions being asked because we were providing them with the information that they needed.
Mhm.
Things like, what's the plan? Where's the boom going to be laid, or where has it been laid? What are you going to do to help us with tourism? What are you going to do? Anything that
Mhm.
came up. And, we had questions like, what do I tell my constituents who are asthmatic when the oil comes in? Are the fumes of this oil, going to
Right.
affect them? We didn't know.
Right.
I
There
didn't
was,
know.
well, there
You
were
know,
lots of potential health effects, or at least
absolutely.
concerns about it, right? But you see that echoed in any major incident. You think about the train derailment up in East Palestine
Hmm.
um, a couple of years ago, where you had just overturned tank cars burning, black smoke. The communities are concerned about health impacts.
Yeah.
And that's something, yeah, we really weren't prepared to talk to, as you've said. But it is something from a broader perspective that, if you work in an extractive industry, oil and gas mining, or even transportations, railroads, these are issues that you're likely going to face from a communications perspective if you have an incident.
Yeah, very much so. I know that I always carried, and again, this so long ago, but there was a little orange book that I used to carry that had the names of all the chemicals and like what the side effects were if you came in contact with it, and things of that sort. So that was like my little Bible for things like
Mhm.
that. And so, again, we were able to give them as much information as we could. And I remember that initial meeting, I think I was able to share a lot more than usual because I had been in Homa and because I had visited with the ops team and this team and that team to know what the plans were, right? They want to know, well, where are you going to be based? Well, we're going to be at this beach in Mobile. We're going to be at this beach here, So I kind of just had all those locations. And if I had a question about said location, well, guess what? I needed to call Kenny, who was my buddy from Texas City, who now was over that. That again, networking goes a long way. So yeah, so it was interesting.
It was interesting. Now, Ruth, we had just been through major staff cuts in the year prior to the Deepwater Horizon oil spill coming in. And we had, as I recall, cut about 40% of the communications staff in the US. And so we went into this kind of shorthanded. So that's just a highlight for you executives out there who question the value of your communications teams. um, we ended up hiring back on a temporary basis a lot of the people we had laid off,
Yep.
and then reaching out and grabbing consultants from all over the place to help staff up for this ever growing response. But you know what, Ruth, one of the things it's interesting is we train people to be in situations like this. It's very difficult to sort of identify personalities and to know who is going to do well in crisis situations. And I'm wondering, you know, did you have different experiences with that? People you were working with who just weren't cut out to deal with the chaos and the absolute
Yeah.
wall-to-wall energy that's required in a big crisis.
Yeah, unfortunately, yes. And it's just different personalities, right? I mean, again, I go back to being a reporter. You're thrown to the wolves. Go do, right? And that's kind of how this is, right? It's very a lot of ambiguity. It's not black and white. I woke up every day and there was, 15 fires to put out of this person needing that or this, meeting this person, that person, whatever. So yeah, it takes I don't know how to describe the type of person, but you've got to have stamina. You've got to just have that get it done mentality, the
Mhm.
figure it out, common sense, connect the dots, all
Making
that.
sense out of chaos, right? Which
Uh-huh.
comes back to your reporter days, I think, too, where you've got to, sort of assess what's happening in a
Hmm.
particular meeting. What's the news here? What should I focus on? I think that's also good
Yeah.
training for that.
And
But I saw that a couple times where, I've had people who were bringing me problems. And instead of figuring out solutions, they would just come with a new problem every day. Like, don't know
yeah,
how to do this. This isn't working. And what you need is people who can find solutions, right? Who
right.
see a problem, identify it, crystallize it, figure out how do we deal with this? Now let's move on to the next one, right? And not
Yeah.
get hung up in that. So I'm sorry, you were saying.
Oh no, just the same. After being in Mobile, I then transferred to Mississippi. So there were three coastal counties in Mississippi, and I oversaw the community relations aspect of it, backup media person. But again, it was do everything. A lot of CSR work, where a
There's
lot of
that jargon thing coming in here,
yeah.
Ruth.
So, and it's different for different companies. So, SABIC is CSR, corporate social responsibility. It's basically your foundation or how you're going to dole out money into the community and for what causes and things of that sort. And it's usually pretty um, iron cut as far as the company supports ABC, and so we're going to give to organizations that support ABC. Right? It's a two-way street, but there's that. All of that kind of went out the window with Deepwater Horizon because we were dealing with so many different um, um, nonprofits that were being impacted or that were helpful
Mhm.
in our case and things of that sort. And you have to be a devil's advocate as well, Tom. Just like question people, like you want what, or what that
Mhm.
some of it just
Well,
doesn't make sense. You got to use your gut
but
instincts
you're
too.
in a difficult situation there, right? Because you're representing the company that's responsible for this oil spill. People are angry at you, and yet you're still pushing back, asking questions about what they want to do with a $10 million grant for something.
Yes, yes. So I did have that with a national organization. I was introduced to them one day, and then a few days later, I got a packet from them asking for several $1 million for case management. That was like the buzzwords, case management at the time. And it was to focus on the Vietnamese shrimpers because they obviously were impacted not being able to shrimp because of the impending oil reaching the coastline. And so it was a well thought out plan. And we're like, okay. And then I just asked, okay. And they were going to bring in people from across the country to support this. So I'm like, okay, of all these people that you're bringing in, how many speak Vietnamese? None of them. Well,
Oops.
oops, yeah. So it was those kind of questions. So you have to kind of treat
Yeah.
it with kid glove because, like you said, you are representing the company that is causing this problem.
Mhm.
But on the flip side, you've got to be responsible for you've got to be the best steward of the money that your company is putting you
Yeah.
responsible for.
And that's,
And I tried to do that.
yeah, I'm really happy to hear that story, Ruth, because there was I mean, there was a lot of good being done by local organizations, but there was also a lot of corruption and a
Yes.
lot of money being siphoned away by people who didn't necessarily have the best interests of the community at heart. And it's very difficult in a crisis setting like that when things are moving fast. You're trying to help people, to really be able to parse through some of those things. So I'm really glad to hear you were able
Yeah.
to hold the line a little bit and at least ask tough questions, get people to go back, rethink their approach, and
Hmm.
maybe come back with a stronger proposal on that.
Right.
Hey,
Right.
I want to talk to you just briefly, Ruth, about crisis training. Because you had talked about when you landed in Houma, Louisiana for that first deployment, that boy, the team there was just up and running. People knew their roles, they knew what they were doing. But that doesn't happen automatically, right? That requires a lot of training. Tell us a little bit about the training that you received or went through in your time there. This would have been, with BP.
Sure. I would say first off, when I joined BP, it was after the incident where 15 contractors died in Texas City, right? So they brought in a lot. They were rebuilding the plant, and it was an eye opener of like, we've got to get our act together, and we've got to be ready. If something ever, hopefully nothing like that would happen again, right? Tragically at the site. And so there was a lot of training when it came to the incident command system, that IMT setting, the different operations, and the logistics and all that.
Mhm.
Um, and that was great because that's, again, that networking. You met different people from throughout the refinery who had different skill sets, things of that sort. That also would help me down the line if I ever had a media call about a particular thing. I knew who those subject matter experts were. So that helped. That was a little side note on that. From a media PIO perspective, BP had a great training called Super Voice. I remember doing it was like a
Mhm.
week long, and it was a little bit of everything. Where one day you were setting up a press conference and you were the spokesperson. The next day you were in the audience asking questions of that spokesperson. We got trained for TV interviews. We got trained for radio interviews. We got trained for media and print interviews. All of it media, but different. So it was, I think they did a great job of preparing us
Mhm.
as best we could, and it helped because then that way, like at Deepwater, I could fill in when my colleague that was overseeing media, went home for a few days. I stepped in and did that.
Mhm.
Um, and I, again, like we were talking earlier about working at a smaller site, at a site versus a corporate office, that training, working at that site, also makes you kind of be more of a jack of all trades. So when I hit the ground running for Deepwater, I could easily do the media. I could handle the community aspect of it. I could handle visiting with the governor. Because I had already done that.
Right. Or
Um,
writing
or
the
writing,
afternoon
yeah,
press release.
yeah. It was it was everything. You kind of got a little bit of everything. So yeah, it
So that,
was good.
yeah, so that's a good nod to just the training aspects of this, and particularly extractive industry, certainly oil and gas, spend a lot of money on training people.
Hmm.
And then it's just a matter of you came up kind of in the refinery setting. You had to translate over to the exploration and production setting,
Yeah.
which has its own
Oh,
set of jargon and
right.
that, which, we'll save that conversation for another episode. Because boy, there's some funny things that happen with some of our, the words and jargon that we use during
Yes.
that,
Yes.
that got a lot of pokes from
Yeah.
Saturday Night Live and others, and
And
and rightfully so.
yeah. And Tom, let me add to that. Aside from my training, there was a lot of training for our leaders, for those subject matter experts. So they too could be prepared when dealing with not only media, but with the community, because I set up, I don't know how many town halls and community meetings, and our leaders stepped up and did a fabulous job because they had been trained. So that's always very important. As a reporter, you always, want the information. And initially it will come from your PIO, right? The company PIO. Well, if it's ongoing, after a couple of days, I don't want to hear from you, the PIO. I want to hear from the CEO. I want to hear from the plant manager. I want to hear from the
Mhm.
whoever's in charge of whatever happened.
Right.
So it's very important that not just you individually as the media spokesperson be trained, but those leaders within your company as well.
Yeah, excellent point there, Ruth. Excellent point. And um, yeah, it's okay, you executives out there and subject matter experts, talk to your public information people and get yourself some media training because it could be you
Yeah.
soon.
And
Well, go ahead, Ruth.
the other thing, you and I both at BP, how many drills did we do, right? When you talk about spending money and training, we did so many drills that were company wide that were, you know, so valuable. Again, not just for the drill itself, but to meet new people, make those connections from other locations,
Mhm.
subject matter experts, things of that sort. And that helps in the long run. If you work at plant A and something happens at another plant, you could easily be called up to help, right? And so you kind of know those folks.
All right, Ruth. Well, I feel like we could talk for 2 more hours on this, but our listeners are wondering how long is this going to go today, Tom? So we'll stop here for now. We'll have you back to have some more fun conversations. Thanks so much for
I'd love
joining
it.
us.
Thank you so much for having me.
And that's going to do it for this episode of the Leading in a Crisis podcast. Thanks again for being with us this time. Again, if you want to reach out to me, you can drop an email to tom@leadinginacrisis.com. And we'll see you again soon for another episode. Take care.